She stepped off the train with hands trembling, even though she'd forced herself to smile. Her dress, a soft cotton trimmed with faded lace, was too thin for the chill biting through the Wyoming air, but she hadn't had a better one in years. Her name was June Foster, or at least that's the name she'd given in her letters. She adjusted the brim of her hat, pulling it lower to shield her eyes, just in case anyone might recognize her. Not that she expected to see a familiar face this far from Kansas. That part of her life was buried deep, and she had no plans to ever dig it up again. The station was quiet except for the rattling of a wheelbarrow and a man shouting for someone named Clive. June's eyes darted around, scanning each man on the platform. She didn't know what her husband-to-be looked like. All she had was his name, Samuel Harland, and his letters. They were kind letters. Thoughtful, sometimes short, but never cold. His words had felt like hope after everything that had come before. She tried not to fidget as the minutes dragged. Her heart was beating too fast, chest tight beneath the lace bodice. She hadn't eaten since morning, and her nerves made her stomach sour. A boy passed her, dragging a sack of potatoes behind him. He stared too long, and June turned her head, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. A woman traveling alone, waiting for a man she'd never met, hoping he wouldn't take one look at her and turn around. Then she saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-covered coat that hung heavy over his frame. His face was weathered but not unkind. His eyes, when they found hers, held no surprise, just a quiet certainty that made her chest ache with a mix of relief and something sharper. He tipped his hat as he approached. "Miss Foster." She nodded, heart pounding. "I'm Samuel Harland." He offered a gloved hand. She stared at it for a second before placing hers in his. His grip was firm, not rough. Warm, even the cold. She wanted to cry at the simple kindness of it. He didn't say much after that, just picked up her trunk and led her to the wagon without asking questions. She climbed in beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap. The ride was quiet, the wheels crunching over frost-covered dirt. The land stretched out in every direction, flat, harsh, and open. No trees, just wide sky and fences that looked like they might fall with the next strong wind. "How far?" she asked finally. "About an hour west." She nodded and stared ahead. Her heart was still rattling in her chest like a loose shutter. She hated the quiet. It let her thoughts run wild. She tried to focus on the sound of the horses, the sway of the wagon, the way the cold pinched her cheeks red. But behind it all was the same fear she thought she'd buried. What if he found out who she really was? Back in Kansas, June Foster didn't exist. There had been a different girl there. A girl with a different name, standing outside a courthouse in a torn dress, eyes swollen from crying. That girl had been whispered about in church pews and across shop counters. That girl had been left alone in a house too big and too quiet after the law said what happened was unfortunate but not illegal. That girl had buried her real name with her sister's grave. "I built the house myself," Samuel said suddenly, pulling her from the past. "Took me 3 winters. Barn came after." She gave a faint smile. "You do it all alone. Had help from a neighbor once. But most of it was just me." They were the first words he'd spoken in miles, and she wasn't sure what to make of them. But the thought of him hammering wood through snow and ice stuck with her. A man who worked hard, who didn't talk much. Maybe that was better. Maybe he wouldn't ask questions. When they reached the homestead, the sun was starting to dip low. The house was modest but solid. 2 stories, small porch, smoke rising from the chimney. A dog barked and came running as they pulled in. June clutched the edge of the seat, suddenly unsure of everything. The land was so quiet. No neighbors in sight. Just emptiness. "You'll be safe here," Samuel said, glancing her way as he climbed down. She didn't know why those words made her throat tighten. Maybe because they were the exact words the sheriff had said once before everything went wrong. He helped her down, then carried her trunk inside. The house smelled like pine and ash. The floors were clean, though bare. No curtains yet, but the windows were new. In the parlor sat a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a Bible. Nothing else. She stood near the hearth, holding her hands out to the warmth. "You can have the upstairs room. I sleep downstairs." Until his voice trailed off. June didn't ask what he meant. She looked around and nodded. "Thank you." They didn't talk about the wedding. That would come later. Maybe tomorrow. He didn't rush it, and she didn't bring it up. She wasn't ready yet. Not to be a wife again. Not after what happened before. But she had nowhere else to go. And Samuel Harland, for all his silence, hadn't looked at her with hunger or suspicion. To something quieter. Something she couldn't name. That night, June sat on the edge of the narrow bed upstairs and took out the letters. She read his words again, searching them for anything she'd missed. A clue. A warning. But they were simple. Honest. Not poetic, but not cold. She ran her fingers over the name at the bottom of each letter. Samuel Harland. She whispered it under her breath. Over and over until it lost meaning. And still, something tugged at the back of her mind. The name. It had felt familiar when she'd first read it, but she'd brushed it off. A common name. Harland. Plenty of Harlands in the world. But now, sitting alone in that upstairs room with wind scraping against the window panes and night closing in, she couldn't ignore the feeling creeping up her spine. Something was wrong. Not with the man. With the name. She tucked the letters back into the satchel and stared at the wall, her thoughts spinning. Her mind reached into the dark corners of her memory, grasping at names, dates, faces she'd forced herself to forget. And one kept circling back, sharp and painful. Harland. There had been a trial. A man. A brother. She pressed a hand to her stomach and leaned forward, breathing slow. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But the name had come from that courtroom, and she'd spent every day since trying to forget it. June woke the next morning to sunlight creeping through the window panes, pale and cold. Her body ached from the stiff mattress, but she rose slowly, slipping into the threadbare shawl she'd carried with her from the train. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted up, sharp and bitter. She paused at the top of the stairs, listening. The dog barked once outside, followed by the sound of boots crunching frost. Samuel was already out by the barn, tending to the animals. His presence was steady, like the land itself, quiet, unmovable. June didn't know yet if that steadiness was something she could trust or something she should fear. But she knew how to live around men like that. Careful words, gentle distance, never asking too much, never revealing too much. She made her way to the kitchen, with a coffee pot steamed gently on the stove. The room was small but clean, the table bare except for a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a half-whittled block of wood beside it. She poured herself a cup and sat down, fingers wrapped tight around the tin mug, trying to calm the tight coil in her chest. By the time Samuel came in, shaking snow from his coat, she was pulling a pan from the shelf. "You don't need to," he began, but she cut him off with a small shake of her head. "I'd rather be useful." He nodded, removing his gloves slowly, then sat down at the table. They didn't speak while she worked. The silence wasn't heavy, just unfinished. Like two people try to figure out how to share air. Later that day, as the sun sat high and the wind eased, Samuel hitched the wagon again and told her they'd be heading into town. "Supplies," he said, "and introductions. People be curious," he added. "Ain't many mail-order brides around here." June flinched at the term. She hated it. How it flattened her, made her sound like a parcel. But she nodded. She didn't have the right to complain. The town of Dry Creek was little more than a few buildings pressed together by the edge of the hills. A general store, a blacksmith, a chapel, and a saloon that looked like it hadn't been swept since spring. As they rode through, eyes followed them. Women stared from behind curtains. Men paused outside the saloon, leaning on posts, watching with that knowing look June had seen before, the kind that asked questions with no words. Inside the store, she met the first of them. "Samuel Harland," the storekeeper called out with a grin. "Heard you finally gone, and fetch yourself a woman. Ain't that something?" The man's wife, a sturdy, round-faced woman with sharp eyes, came out from the back with a basket of canned goods. "I'm Martha Clay," she said, nodding at June. "And don't mind my husband, he talks more than he listens." June forced a polite smile. "June Harland, it's good to meet you." Martha looked her over with a curiosity that wasn't unkind but far from friendly. "You come from the East?" "Kansas," June answered. Martha's eyes flickered. "Big place. Lot of trouble their last few years." June said nothing. As Samuel and the shopkeeper loaded the wagon, Martha leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Word travels slow out here, but it travels. If there's something you're running from, you best keep it behind you." June looked her in the eye. "I have no plans of bringing it with me." The ride home was quiet again, but this time, June felt more watched than alone. Martha's words clung to her ribs like damp cotton. That night, she stood by the window upstairs and stared out at the frozen field. In the moonlight, Samuel was a silhouette by the barn, his breath clouding the air as he tossed hay into the stalls. She wanted to believe he was just a good man living a hard life. But every time she read his name in those old letters, her gut twisted. The next morning brought another visitor. Samuel's neighbor rode in with a bundle of firewood and a boy trailing behind him on a pony. His name was Elias Dunn, a wiry man in his 40s with a sunburned face and a thick drawl. The boy, Nathaniel, had Samuel's eyes but none of his quiet. "Figured you could use more wood," Elias said, "and maybe a friend." Nathaniel hopped down from the pony and marched right up to June. "You're the new wife," he said bluntly. "You gonna stay or run off like the last one?" June blinked. "The last one." Elias cleared his throat. "Boy doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut." "No," June said softly, her hands twisting together. "Let him speak." Samuel had never mentioned another woman. June looked to him, but he was stone-faced. "She left before winter," Elias said after a beat. "Didn't suit the place. Or the man." June swallowed hard. "What was her name?" Samuel looked at her then. "Mary." It meant nothing to her. But the tone he used, like the word was an old bruise, told her it wasn't nothing to him. Later, while the men chopped wood out back, Martha Clay rode up again, this time on foot, with her coat flapping in the wind. "I thought I'd come for a visit," she said without waiting for an invitation. "Make sure you're settling in." June offered her tea and tried to seem calm, though her nerves were frayed. Martha sat by the hearth and studied the walls, the floor, the curtainless windows. "You should know something," she said at last. "Samuel's brother used to live in Dry Creek. Left years ago, but his name still stirs trouble." June set the kettle down, her hands frozen. "His brother?" "Martin Harland," Martha said. "Some say he rode with men who did bad things. Some say worse." June sat across from her, throat dry. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because women like us don't always get warnings. I don't know what you've been through, June, but I can tell when someone's carrying ghosts." June didn't respond. Couldn't. That night, she dug through her satchel again. Not the letters. The newspaper clipping she kept hidden at the bottom, yellowed and brittle. It was from 3 years ago. A trial. A girl. A man named Martin Harland accused of assault. Acquitted. Too much doubt. The girl's sister, June, had tried to testify, but no one had listened. She stared at the name, her hands shaking. Martin Harland. The same last name. Too close to be coincidence. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know yet what Samuel knew, whether he was protecting her or hiding something. But one thing was clear. Whatever peace she thought she'd found here was already cracking, and the ghosts she tried to leave behind were catching up fast. The days turned colder, and June could feel the edges of her new life begin to fray. She busied herself with chores, sweeping the floors, learning the rhythm of Samuel's days, helping him salt meat and mend fence posts. But even as her hands worked, her mind stayed elsewhere. Each time she heard her name spoken aloud, June Harland, she felt her skin crawl, like the name didn't belong to her at all, like she was borrowing someone else's life. She watched Samuel closely now, not with fear exactly, but with guarded attention. He was kind in his way. He let her move at her own pace, never asked for more than she gave, never raised his voice. But there were gaps in him, hollow places where questions sank and never came back. He didn't talk about his past, and when she asked small things about his parents, about childhood, he'd answer with one or two words, then go quiet. But he wasn't the only one holding something back. Elias started stopping by more often under the excuse of dropping off firewood or checking on livestock. He never stayed long, but June noticed the way his eyes lingered on her hands, her face, the curve of her back when she bent to gather kindling. It was subtle, but not hidden. Samuel noticed too. One evening after Elias had gone, he stood at the doorway watching the dark, his jaw clenched tight. "He's a man who doesn't know how to stay in his own yard," Samuel muttered. June folded her arms. "Is there something I should be worried about?" Samuel looked at her. "Only if you give him reason." It was a warning, not a threat. But the chill in his tone struck something deep. The tension didn't stop with Elias. One afternoon, while she was fetching water from the well near the edge of the property, she noticed hoof prints in the dirt. Fresh ones, not from Samuel's wagon. 2 sets. She stared at them a long time, her heart thudding in her ears. The tracks led in from the east and vanished near the barn. But Samuel hadn't mentioned visitors. That night, when she asked him if anyone had come by, he looked at her for a long time before saying, "Just Elias." She didn't believe him. The unease settled into her bones like the cold. It made her sleep light, ears straining for the sound of hooves, or the creak of the barn door, or anything out of place. Then, a few nights later, she woke to voices. Low, male, outside. She crept from her room and down the stairs, careful not to make the wood groan underfoot. Through the frosted glass of the front window, she saw 2 figures near the edge of the barn. One of them Samuel, the other 2 wrapped in shadow to make out. "She doesn't know," the other man was saying. "And if she does, it don't matter. It's done. She's not part of this," Samuel replied. "She came here looking for peace. That don't change where she came from, or what she knows." There was a pause, then boots crunching in the frost, and silence. June ducked back before Samuel came inside, heart pounding so hard it made her stomach churn. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. But the doubt was sharp now, impossible to ignore. A few days later, a letter arrived, delivered by hand. No mail carrier, no name on the envelope, just her name in neat script. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words written across it. "You married the wrong Harland." She read it again and again, standing by the stove as the fire hissed. Her hands shook. She burned the letter before Samuel came in. She wanted to confront him, wanted to scream and throw the ashes in his face. But something told her that would be a mistake. So instead, she watched, waited, listened. Then came the snowstorm. 3 days of it, thick and unrelenting. Wind howled through the cracks in the windows. They were trapped inside, just the 2 of them, the dog curled in the corner and the fire burning low. On the second night, Samuel sat across from her at the table, oil lamp casting shadows across his face. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've had a lot on my mind." He nodded slowly. "You don't trust me." She didn't answer. "You think I'm hiding something." Still, she said nothing. "I am." June looked up sharply. His eyes were steady, unreadable. "What?" she whispered. He took a breath. "Martin was my brother. You know that now. I figured it out when I saw the way you looked at the name. I should have said something sooner." June's chest felt tight. Her breath came short. "Why didn't you?" "Because I thought maybe you didn't know. Or maybe you were someone else. You came with a name that wasn't yours. I figured we both had reasons to keep quiet." Her voice cracked. "He hurt my sister, and no one did a damn thing about it." Samuel didn't flinch. "I know what he did. I tried to get him to turn himself in. He ran instead. I haven't seen him in years." June stood, hands trembling. "You're telling me you just let him go?" "No," Samuel said calmly. "I told the sheriff where he was. They didn't care. Said it was your sister's word against his. Said he came from a respectable family. But I was done protecting him." She stared at him, chest heaving. So you married me out of guilt? No. Then why? Because I saw your letters. You weren't begging for a man. You were fighting to live. And I thought, maybe we could be two people who stopped running. His voice broke then, just barely, but she heard it. They didn't speak for a long time after that. The storm raged outside. Inside, the fire popped and cracked. And somewhere between the silence and the truth, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The next morning, they found boot prints again. But this time, Samuel looked genuinely angry. Not surprised, angry. "Who's coming here?" June asked. He shook his head. "I don't know, but I'll find out." That afternoon, she found him in the barn with a rifle. "What are you planning to do?" she asked quietly. "Protect what's mine." June stared at him. "Even if your brother comes back." He looked at her, and the answer was already there. "If he comes back," Samuel said slowly, "he won't leave again." The storm had changed something in both of them. The lie between them had broken. The truth was ugly, but it was real. June found herself waking in the morning and looking at him differently. Not with love, but with a fragile kind of trust. But it didn't last long. A week later, Elias came riding fast across the field, face pale, hat clutched tight in one hand. "They found a body," he said, "east of town, near the river." Samuel stepped outside, jaw tight. "Who?" "Sheriff doesn't know yet. But it's bad. Real bad." That night, June couldn't sleep. She lay awake, remembering Martin's voice from the trial, smooth and cold. Remembering the way the townspeople had stared at her, like she was the problem, not him. Remembering her sisters shaking hands and hollow eyes. In the morning, she walked to the river alone. The snow had mostly melted, leaving patches of mud and ice. The sheriff and two men were already there, kneeling by a tarp. She stayed hidden behind a tree. Then she saw the man's face. It wasn't Martin, but it was the stranger who had spoken with Samuel behind the barn that night. His neck bore bruises, strangled. That night, June went back to the barn. She found a rope, recently cut. She found muddy boots, not Samuel's size. And in the corner, she found a blood-stained shirt tucked beneath hay. Her stomach turned. She backed out slowly, her heart racing. In the house, Samuel was sitting at the table with his hands folded, as if he'd been waiting for her. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said quietly. Her voice barely came out. "What did you do?" "He came to blackmail me. Said he knew where Martin was. Said he'd tell the sheriff if I didn't pay." "You killed him." Samuel didn't answer. She stepped back. What if he was lying? What if he didn't know anything? I couldn't take the chance. June felt something collapse inside her. The line between good and evil blurred, too fast for her to hold on to. She had come here to escape a monster, and she had found another man shaped by the same blood. But Samuel wasn't Martin. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't lied. Not fully. He just made a choice. A dark one. And now she had to decide what to do with that truth. Stay, or leave before it was too late. June didn't speak to Samuel the next morning. She couldn't. Her voice felt trapped in her chest, coiled tight around the weight of what she'd seen in the barn. She moved through the house like a ghost, folding sheets that didn't need folding, sweeping already clean floors. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't like before, where they simply didn't know how to talk. Now it was thick with things unsaid, heavy with the knowledge of blood on the snow and lies that went too deep to undo. Samuel went about his chores like nothing had happened, but June could feel the strain in his movements, the way his shoulders stayed tense even when he sat. He didn't ask her where she'd gone the night before. He didn't ask her what she'd seen, but she could tell he knew. By the third day, she was ready to speak, or at least to ask the question that had been burning a hole in her ribs. "Are you going to bury the body?" Samuel looked up from the table. He didn't flinch. "It's already taken care of." "Ow! I dragged him to the ravine and let the river take him." "You think that's the end of it?" He stared at her for a long time. "I hoped it was." June sat down across from him. "You hoped wrong." The sheriff came 2 days later. Sheriff Wendell, a gray-bearded man with tired eyes and a worn badge, rode up to the porch and tipped his hat like he wasn't carrying a storm on his back. Samuel greeted him at the door with his usual calm, but June could see the flicker of something new in his face. Nervousness. Guilt. Fear. "Mind if I come in?" Wendell asked. "Course not," Samuel said. The sheriff took off his hat and stepped into the warmth, glancing around the room like he'd never seen it before, though he had. "Folks are talking," he said. "Found the rest of that man's belongings scattered downstream. One of the boys from a mill recognized him. Said he used to run messages between mining towns. But there's no word on why he was out this far." June stood by the stove, her back to them, her hands shaking slightly. "You think someone killed him?" Samuel asked. Sheriff Wendell shrugged. "He didn't fall in, that's for sure. Rope marks on his neck. Someone meant to finish him quiet, then panicked." Samuel didn't reply. Wendell looked over at June. "You see anyone unfamiliar riding around this week?" June turned slowly. Her eyes met Samuel's, and she lied. "No." Wendell didn't press. He stayed for coffee, then tipped his hat again and left. But as he rode away, June felt the ground shift beneath her. The law had come to their door once. It would come again. That night, Samuel stood behind her as she stared out the window. "I never wanted to pull you into this," he said. "But you did," she replied without looking back. They slept in separate rooms that night, but neither of them slept much. Samuel stayed up with the dog, sitting in the dark with a rifle leaning against the wall. June lay staring at the ceiling, going over every moment of the past weeks in her mind. The kindnesses, the silences, the way his voice had softened the night he admitted the truth about Martin. She didn't know anymore whether to see him as a man who had tried to protect her or a man unraveling under his own guilt. The next morning, Martha Clay arrived unannounced. "You've heard, haven't you?" she asked as she stepped into the kitchen, brushing snow off her cloak. "Heard what?" Wendell's putting together a list. "Folks he thinks might have had a reason to want that man dead." June stiffened. "Why would he think it's anyone from town?" "Because he's not stupid. He knows this place has secrets." Martha lowered her voice. "And you should know, someone saw you walking to the river that morning." June's heart nearly stopped. "Who? I don't know. But it's out there now. People are wondering what you were doing alone out there before the body was found." June steadied herself on the back of a chair. "I didn't do anything." "I didn't say you did," Martha said gently. "But people here don't need truth to start sharpening knives. Just whispers." June saw the fear in her eyes then. Not for herself, but for June. "You should leave," Martha said quietly, "before someone gives Wendell a reason to arrest you just to calm the town." June wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew it was true. Her presence here had stirred up something ugly, something that had nothing to do with her, but stuck to her like ash from someone else's fire. But Samuel wouldn't let her go easily. When she brought it up that evening, his expression hardened. "No, you don't own me," she snapped. "No, but I brought you here, and I've already lost too much." She softened. "I'm not running away. I'm trying to survive. I can protect you." She shook her head. "You couldn't protect your brother. You couldn't even protect yourself." He flinched. The words had cut deeper than she'd intended, but they were true. He left the house that night without saying where he was going. She didn't sleep. She waited by the fire, the dog curled at her feet, watching the shadows flicker on the wall. When he returned before dawn, his coat was soaked, his boots caked with mud. "Where were you?" she asked. "I went to Elias." "Why?" "To find out what he knows. He's been watching too closely, asking questions." June stepped back. "You threatened him?" Samuel didn't answer, which meant yes. "I won't let this place turn me into someone I hate," she said. He met her gaze. "It already has." That was when she knew whatever fragile thing had grown between them was breaking. Not because they didn't care for each other, but because there was too much rot beneath the soil. Too many buried things clawing to the surface. By the end of the week, the sheriff returned. This time with a warrant. "I need to ask you to come with me, Mrs. Harland," Wendell said. Samuel stood between them. "What's this about?" "Witness says she saw your wife near the river with something in her hands. Said she looked like she was trying to hide something." June stepped forward before Samuel could speak. I'll go. The ride to town was quiet. Wendell didn't cuff her, didn't speak much. But when they arrived, she was placed in a small holding room behind the jailhouse, and the door clicked shut behind her. Martha came that afternoon with a shawl and a tin of bread. You have to talk, she whispered through the bars. Before someone else does. Say what you know, before they twist it into something worse. June wanted to scream. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't killed that man. But she had lied. She had seen too much, stayed too silent. And now the weight of someone else's crime was pushing down our chest. That evening, Samuel came. Wendell let him speak to her through the bars, but not privately. He stood in the corner, watching. I'm going to fix this, Samuel said. You can't, June whispered. Not anymore. I'll tell them the truth. She looked up, eyes red. The truth won't save me. It'll destroy you. He reached for her hand through the bars, but she pulled away. You said you wanted to protect me, she said. Then do it. Tell them I didn't know. Tell them I never saw anything. Say whatever you have to say to make them let me go. I can't lie, Samuel said. You already have. The next morning, a fire broke out behind the saloon. By the time Wendell and the deputies got there, 2 men had fled town. Elias and another man, a cousin of Martin Harland. Rumor spread fast. Someone had been paid off. Someone else had threatened Martha. The sheriff started to connect dots he hadn't seen before. And Samuel finally told the truth. He admitted to knowing the man who died, admitted to burying him, claimed the killing was an accident, a struggle gone wrong, claimed June wasn't there, didn't know a thing. Wendell didn't believe all of it, but it was enough. June was released. Samuel was held for trial. They let her see him one last time. He stood behind the bars now, the way she had. His eyes were tired but calm. You're free, he said softly. June shook her head. No, I'm just not in a cage. Neither of them said goodbye. She walked out of the jailhouse into the cold morning light with only the clothes on her back and the name she no longer wanted. And as she walked past the blacksmith, the chapel, and the saloon still smoking from the fire, June realized something with painful clarity. There were worse prisons than a cell. There were names heavier than chains. And love, when built on silence and blood, always costs more than it gives. June didn't look back as she left Dry Creek. The wind stung her face, and the sky hung low with gray clouds, heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. Her feet were raw in her worn boots, and her satchel weighed next to nothing, just a change of dress and the half-burned letters she couldn't bring herself to throw away. She didn't know where she was going, just that she couldn't stay. The sheriff had released her, the town had let her go, but freedom felt hollow when you carried shame like a second skin. She stayed 3 nights in a boarding house a few miles south, paid for by money Martha had quietly tucked into her coat pocket the day she was released. The old woman who ran the place kept to herself, only asking once if June needed anything. June shook her head and spent her nights staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the silence pressing in on her like a slow collapse. She hadn't cried yet, not after the arrest, not after Samuel confessed, not even when the door shut behind her and the whole town turned their backs. On the 4th day, a letter came. No name on the outside, just her. Inside was a single page, written in Samuel's careful, square handwriting. She read it by the light of the oil lamp, lips pressed tight to keep her hands from shaking. June, there's no way to make it right. I thought by telling the truth, I'd give you a chance to walk away clean. But the truth isn't simple. It's never been. You deserve better than me. You deserve peace, and I brought you more ghosts. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know this. When I chose to protect you, it wasn't out of guilt. It was because I saw the weight you carried, and I wanted for once in my life to carry something for someone else. They say my trial will be in the spring. The snow will be gone by then. Maybe you will too, but if you're still here, I'll be looking for your face in the crowd. Samuel. She folded the letter and sat back, her throat burning. His words were honest, stripped bare, and yet they did nothing to ease the war inside her. He'd taken a life, lied to the law, pulled her into his silence. And still, he had also been the first person in years who hadn't asked her to be anything other than what she was. That night, June walked into town, heading to the sheriff's office. Not to see Samuel. She wasn't ready. But to ask Wendell one question. What happened to Martin? Wendell looked up slowly. He was tired, the lines around his mouth deeper, his uniform dusted with ash from a recent fire call. He leaned back in his chair and studied her. You really don't know? She shook her head. He nodded once. He's dead. Been dead for months. They found his body near Silver Ridge. Stabbed, likely in a fight. No one claimed him. Took us weeks to connect the name. I told Samuel before the man showed up with threats. Before the river. But I don't think he ever told you. June sat down slowly. Why didn't he? I asked him the same thing. He said he didn't want to speak your sister's name unless you were ready. Said some things are better buried than dug up. June felt something break loose in her chest. All this time, she'd been afraid of Martin coming back, watching for him in strangers' faces, holding her breath with every knock at the door. And he was already gone, dead and cold in a nameless grave. She left the office and walked through the quiet streets, lit only by dim lanterns and the moon behind a curtain of thin clouds. It was almost peaceful. Almost. The next day, she returned to Dry Creek. The town didn't welcome her, but it didn't spit her out either. People looked away when she passed. A few nodded, a few muttered, but no one stopped her. She went to Martha's first. The older woman opened the door and pulled her inside before June could say a word. I thought you'd gone for good, she said. I thought I had too. They sat in the kitchen, tea between them, the stove rattling. Martha waited. Martin's dead, June said softly. Sheriff told me. Martha's mouth set into a hard line. God has a way of leveling things, even if it takes a while. June looked down at her hands. Samuel knew, and he never told me. Martha didn't look surprised. He thought it would protect you? I think so. Martha sighed. He always tried to do right, just never knew how to do it clean. Later that week, June sat in the back of the courtroom during the preliminary hearing. Her heart pounded as Samuel was led inside, wrists shackled, eyes searching the room. When he saw her, he didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked at her, and in that look was everything they'd been through. Every lie, every truth, every unsaid word. The judge read the charges. Murder, unlawful disposal of a body, interfering with an investigation. The room buzzed with whispers. The district attorney spoke coldly, citing Samuel's admission, the evidence found on his land, the witness statements. Then Samuel stood. His voice was steady as he answered the judge's questions. No dramatics, no defense yet, just calm words and a tired gaze. After the hearing, June stood by the steps of the courthouse. She didn't wait for him, but she knew he'd seen her. That was enough. Days passed. Then the sheriff came again, this time with a message. Samuel wants to talk to you. One last time. He said you deserve the choice. She hesitated. Where? Jail. The room was cold and bare, just a bench between them. Samuel looked thinner, like the weeks had carved hollows into his cheeks. He didn't speak right away. You came, he said at last. I did. He nodded slowly. Did you hate me? I don't know what I felt, June said honestly. Grief, maybe, for what we lost, for what never had a chance. He stared down at his hands. I should have told you about Martin. Yes, she said, but not because I wanted to hear it, because I needed to. He looked up. He died alone, June, and I didn't cry. I wanted to. I wanted to remember him as a boy, but all I could remember was her face. Her sister. June hadn't spoken her name in 2 years. Now, she let the memory come, painful and sharp. Her sister sitting on the porch steps, eyes swollen, hands trembling, saying, No one's going to believe me, June. Not even him. I hated him for what he did, Samuel said, and I hated myself for not stopping it. That man who came later, he reminded me too much of Martin. The lies, the threat in his voice. I couldn't let it happen again. June nodded. But you did kill him. Yes. And you let me carry the weight of that. Even after I asked. I was afraid you'd leave. She stood. You didn't have to lie to keep me. You just had to trust me." He stood to slowly. "I do. Now. But I don't expect you to wait." "I'm not waiting," she said. "I'm living." That's what she would have wanted. They looked at each other, the silence between them no longer sharp, just sad. He reached out and touched her hand, lightly. "If you ever write," he said, "I'll write back." She nodded, but said nothing more. And then she left. She walked through Dry Creek with her head held steady, boots firm against the road, wind at her back. No destination this time, just forward. Samuel Harland would serve time. The town would whisper. The past would always ache. But June was done hiding. Done carrying shame that didn't belong to her. Done letting silence speak louder than truth. She was not a bride anymore. Not a sister haunted by ghosts. Not a name borrowed or a woman buried under someone else's crimes. She was herself, and that at last was enough. Spring came late that year. The thaw crept in slowly, melting the edges of the riverbanks and loosening the frozen grip on Dry Creek soil. Snow turned to slush, then to mud, and the wind finally softened. The world, it seemed, was trying to forget winter ever happened. But June remembered. She carried every moment of it inside her, not as a wound anymore, but as a scar she had learned to live with. She rented a small cabin on the edge of town, near the hills where the trees stood crooked and wild. It was nothing like the farmhouse she had shared with Samuel, but it was hers. Quiet, unclaimed. The landlord was an older widow who didn't ask questions. June kept to herself, doing mending work for the women in town and helping at the chapel when they let her. She didn't speak Samuel's name out loud anymore, but it lived in her mind like a song half forgotten, the kind that comes back to you in dreams. Letters came every month, all from the same hand. Neat, steady. Samuel never begged for her return. He didn't ask her to wait. He wrote of the land, of how the fields had begun to grow again, of the jailhouse and its routines, of memories he hadn't dared speak aloud when he was free. June read every word. She never wrote back, but she kept the letters in a wooden box by the window, tied with twine. One Sunday in early May, she walked past the schoolyard and saw a little girl reading on the steps. Barefoot, her hair tangled, a torn book in her lap. June paused and asked where her mother was. The girl shrugged. "She said to wait here," she said. Said she had to go talk to someone real quick. An hour passed, then two. June sat with her until dusk, then took her to the chapel. They found a mother 2 days later, drunk, passed out in the fields behind the mill. It wasn't the first time. The sheriff scolded her, but there wasn't much he could do. There were no jails left for women like that. Only more nights alone. June didn't return the girl. Instead, she brought her home, washed her feet, combed her hair, and gave her the warmest blanket she had. The next week, she started teaching her to read. Word spread, quietly, gently, that the woman who had once stood behind bars was now watching over a child. That she didn't flinch when someone cursed her name. That she didn't hide anymore when the past was mentioned. By summer, other children came. First one, then two more. Then a boy with bruises on his back and no shoes on his feet. In June, who had once arrived with nothing but grief and a borrowed last name, became something she never expected. A safe place. One afternoon in July, a new letter arrived. The handwriting was shaky this time. It was short. "They're releasing me soon. Not because I was innocent, but because I told the truth and I served what they called enough time. I'll go back to the land. The house needs repairs. The barn roof leaks. I'll fix it, alone if I have to, but I'll leave the lamp on in case you ever ride past again." There was no signature. June folded the letter slowly. She didn't cry. She only sat for a long time, watching the sun slip low across the hills. The girl, Eliza, played with her doll on the porch, humming softly. The truth was, June didn't know if she'd ever go back. Didn't know if the man she had almost learned to love was still someone she could trust, even now. But she knew this. He had changed. And so had she. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired of carrying pain. That night, she lit her own lamp and set it by the window. Not for him, Not an answer, but as a kind of offering, a way of saying, I see you. I survived you. And maybe, in your own way, you survived me too. Years would pass. The town would forget the worst of the whispers. June's name would settle into memory, not as a scandal, but as a woman who stayed when she could have run, who told the truth when it could have cost her everything, and who built something good out of all the pieces that were left. People still talked about the mail-order bride who came looking for a home and found something darker. But no one remembered what Samuel's last name had once meant. Not really, because in the end, it wasn't the name that mattered. It was the story she wrote after, and the children she kept warm when no one else had room.